Hi, this is A.J.B from A.J.B Counseling and Psychotherapy, a private practice located in Manhattan. So I think it's finally time that I talk more about what it is that I mainly do. My main specialty, and a specialty which I built my practice around, is in treating panic disorders. The reason why I know it so well is because I used to have a panic disorder. And this is what allows me to be so effective and understand what goes into having to deal with a panic disorder. I know firsthand that it's how do I put it? Exhausting, terrifying, sometimes even depression-inducing thing to have to deal with. And I feel for you. If you're going through that, I really feel for you. And I want you to know, though, that you can make it stop. There is a way to completely come out of it as though you never had it. I know that right now, if you're going through it, it probably feels like, man, this is never going to end. Oh my God, how am I ever going to stop this? I feel there's absolutely no control. How do I control this when it feels so out of control? There's a way. There's a way to move through it. And I'm going to briefly give an overview of what goes into getting this done. But first, let's talk about why do we even get panic disorder? Why do we even get panic attacks? If you ask different specialists that are coming from different therapeutic backgrounds, they'll give you different answers. Is one more true than the other? I don't know. To be honest, I don't really have a very good answer for why this happens to people. In some sense, it almost feels like luck of the draw. It's kind of like if you have people walking along a path, right? And suddenly the path forks, splits into two. Why do some people choose the path to the left and why do some people choose the path to the right? Who knows? But there is an analogy here. When we're going through a very stressful period of time, we develop a more pronounced symptoms of anxiety. So during that time, we were all developing more intense symptoms of anxiety. For some of us, for example, a cliche symptom of panic trigger is chest pain, right? A lot of us will think we're about to have a heart attack. So for some of us, we feel this symptom and we then go to ourselves, we make another leap in logic. We go, oh my God, I might have a heart attack because I don't know what else to make of this symptom. It's probably a heart attack. And that leads to a further escalation of anxiety, which then intensifies that symptoms even more. And then that more intense symptom then convinces us even further that yes, we were right. We're definitely having a heart attack. And that packs on even more anxiety. So that's how it spirals out of control. That's how you have your first panic attack. The fork in the road is why do some people make that interpretation and others just kind of go like, holy hell, I'm so tight and tense, right? I don't know. But I think that's the crucial moment that distinguishes people who are dealing with really intense anxiety and develop panic disorders and those who do not develop panic disorders. And so that's how I think you probably develop your panic disorder. You had that one moment where you misinterpreted your anxious symptoms. You interpreted them in a way that signaled a bigger disaster coming, which wasn't. That disaster wasn't coming, but you were convinced that it was coming, and that added on more anxiety, and that extra anxiety made those symptoms even more pronounced, which convinced you even further that it's definitely coming, and it spiraled out of control like that until you had a full-blown panic attack. Another way of talking about panic disorder is basically fear of fear, or more accurately, maybe it's fear of the symptoms of fear. Now, for a lot of people, the fear is just of actually dying. So heart attack, right? some people might have a tension somewhere lower in their bodies. My camera is not low enough, but I'm pointing to my belly. So sometimes people will have like a tension lower on an abdomen or something, and they'll start thinking, oh, maybe it's cancer, right? Because we can't say it's heart attack, so we have to interpret it in some other negative, horrific way, and we'll say it's cancer. Sometimes we'll get dizzy. We'll start thinking, oh, I'm about to faint and embarrass myself. So faint and embarrassment, that's actually an example of a different death, but a lot of it is about some kind of death. Some is literal death, physical death, and then for some other individuals or other variants of fears fueling our panic disorder, they could be deaths of an idea of ourselves. So that could be the loss of status. So if we're at work and somehow our panic is tied into, if I have a panic attack at work, then X, Y, and Z, and that X, Y, and Z means like loss of some kind of status, loss of job, loss of financial freedom maybe. It's always something very catastrophic. Now, another good question to ask is, how long will it take for me to get rid of it? One scenario that I'm familiar with are groups of people that come in to therapy for panic disorder who are already taking medication, and it's fairly effective. For this group of people who are already, whose panic attacks are already being controlled with medication, their goal is to get off the medication and be okay without it. For them, treatment will take at least a year. Now, that's actually the longer group. The reason why it takes longer is that we have to coordinate with the psychiatrist to slowly wean you off the medication. The reason why we have to wean you off is, well, not only that, is that often the main goal of the person who's coming to therapy who's already on medication, but also because without you having symptoms of the panic attacks and without you actually having panic attacks, we can't treat the panic attacks. Another phrase that I tend to use often when I'm treating people with panic disorders is saying that the only way out of this fire is through it, or the only way out of this problem is through the fire. You cannot avoid the heat. You have to go towards it. And that's terrifying because the nature of panic disorder is that we spend our entire time avoiding it, avoiding the anxiety, avoiding the triggers, trying to not have that awful experience. Unfortunately, we have to go through it in order to get rid of it. So when it comes to medication, we have to slowly wean you off so that you have more and more of those symptoms. Now, these symptoms, because you're still going to be taking that medication just in smaller and smaller dosages, they're not going to be as intense, which is good and bad. It's good because it's much more controlled, so it's more manageable. It's bad because you're not dealing with the full force of the panic sooner, you're also delaying the length of treatment. You're lengthening the length of treatment. Not the end of the world, not that big of a deal. Either way, you'll get to the final destination of being panic attack free. The other scenario are people who, the other group of people for whom treatment will also take at least a year, are those who come in without medication but are going through what I would call a secondary depression. So, panic disorders are one of the most debilitating conditions we can have. They can stop us from socializing, they can stop us from working. If we deal with them for a long time without any help, we can become hopeless or helpless about them, which is another word for becoming depressed. So if you've been drained of your will to fight, to keep fighting with this disorder, then my recommendation to you will most likely be to get on medication. The reason for that is that we need to restore that fighting spirit as fast as possible. I don't want you to be dragging yourself through mud. If you're already depressed, if you're already hopeless about what you're going through, I don't want you to be prolonging that misery any longer than you have to. And so for that reason, again, I'm going to say that the treatment is going to take at least a year because we have to get you on the medication, probably longer, because not only do we have to get you on the medication, we want to stabilize you, meaning we also want to give you some time to breathe. Once you're on the medication, we want to make sure you're panic attack free. And then once you're free of panic attacks, you need to give your soul time to rejuvenate, if I can say it like that. Afterwards, once you're ready, then we begin the treatment, which means we start cutting down on your dosages, again with the help of a psychiatrist. Now, lastly, there is one last group for whom treatment tends to be on a shorter end. This is a group of people who come into therapy without any medication. Oftentimes their panic disorder has just begun. They quickly came to see a therapist, and they have not yet been worn out. They still have that fighting spirit. For these individuals, treatment can take as little as 3 months for them to, for some, I've seen some people be good even before 3 months. But for most people, 3-month mark is that, it's called magical number, magical time frame, where at the least, these individuals will be able to see how they will stop, they will end their panic disorder for good. They see the path forward because they've seen improvements. They've had successes in either interrupting their panic attacks or just decreasing the intensity of them or decreasing the frequency of them. They saw it all, the rationale, the philosophy made sense to them. So now, how do we go about getting rid of panic disorders? All right, so generally speaking, there's a lot that I could say, and it'll be easier for me if you guys actually ask me questions, follow-up questions to whatever I'm saying right now. That way I can kind of create this semi-back and forth conversational thing with you around this topic. So I'm not gonna get into everything because that can take me a good long time to cover. But I will cover the crux of it, the two main approaches. So the first thing that I typically do with people who come to me for help with panic disorders is I work on desensitization. Desensitization is, when I say that, I mean teaching you or having you teach yourself that the symptoms that you feel that typically precede panic attacks or happen during panic attacks are not dangerous at all. That ultimately, where I want to bring you mentally in terms of how you relate to those symptoms, I want you to treat them no more dangerously. They are no more dangerous than that little bit of sadness you might feel after you've played a game of chess and lost, right? That doesn't stop you from playing a game of chess, right? You'll still play a game of chess because you don't mind that little bit of, oh, dang it, I lost. That's where I want to bring you to in terms of the kind of relationship you'll have with your panic attack and anxiety symptoms. I start with this approach because it tends to get faster and more consistent results. After that, once we make some headway on this, we'll start working on something that I call surrender. So surrender, that's sometimes misunderstood. It's understood as though it's kind of like defeatist, hopeless kind of a thing. That is the last thing it is. It's instead a form of opposition. It's a form of fighting. The way I look at it is, one way you can look at it in some ways, kind of like Gandhi's approach to resistance. It's also a form of acceptance that. Let me backtrack. Let me try to explain this from another angle. Panic attacks are fueled by your worst fears. One of the tricks that we sometimes use in therapy when working with panic attacks is to personify your panic. We give it a human-esque quality. For example, you might have like a mental image of a demon, like a little goblin or something, that just feeds on your fear, right? And it's infested you, and now it's feeding on your fear. So it has to keep on throwing out these scary scenarios for you in order to keep generating more fear in you so that it can eat, right? One way to kill it is to starve it. In order to starve it, we have to stop feeding it fear. One way to stop feeding it fear is to accept, to some degree, not fully necessarily, but to some degree, the worst case scenarios that it keeps on throwing at us. So, for example, it might throw at you the scenario of having a heart attack. There's only so much that we can possibly and reasonably do to stop a heart attack. Ultimately, if enough plaque has built up in our arteries, and it's our time, then it's our time. And having that approach, having that realization that there's only so much control that we have over life. I mean, right now, I don't know if you've seen the movie Donnie Darko. Sometimes I use that as an example, as a silly example. But I mean, it's technically possible. In Donnie Darko, there was a plane flying overhead and an engine crashed into somebody's house. That could happen, right? How much control do we really have over that? Do we really have more control over a heart attack than something like that, than a meteor coming down from the sky? Really, we don't. And realizing that can be really liberating. When a person is able to realize that, let's say you are about to have a heart attack, let's say you're about to have a panic attack, right? And right as you're about to have a panic attack and you're thinking that you're having a heart attack, if you realize that in that moment there's really nothing you can do, then you give up this attempt to hustle. You stop hustling around trying to garner somehow control. You stop trying to control the situation. You stop feeding fear. It's like you melt into what is going to happen. To whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And once you kind of melt it back into that, you stop feeding it fear. And if you're lucky enough to have an experience like this right in the middle of a panic attack where you completely accept whatever may come, you will immediately stop the panic attack. Surrender is much more difficult to pull off though than desensitization. Not everybody is able to get all the way to that place, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to get to that place. But I still do try that approach because it's very quick. If a person can get it, they can stop panic attack almost immediately. They can stop having panic disorder almost immediately. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're able to pull this off, that doesn't mean that you won't have future returning panic attacks. You probably will, but you catch them like that and go right back to that mental space that you had before that allowed you to stop it. And once you have that, it becomes almost a non-issue, because every time you start feeling it coming, you're able to intervene immediately. So I hope you guys found this helpful. I'm sure there's a lot more I can tell you about this. I'm going to wait and see if you guys ask any questions. Feel free to ask them, leave them in the comments section. If you found this helpful, informative, useful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. There'll be more videos coming in the future. And I'll see you in the next video.